The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Ravencrest Palace as King Edmund VII made his way through the ancient corridors. His footsteps echoed against the walls lined with portraits of his ancestors, each face a reminder of the weight of tradition that rested upon his shoulders. At 63, Edmund had ruled the kingdom of Aldoria for nearly 2 decades, but recent events had shaken the very foundations of the monarchy he had sworn to protect. The crisis had begun 3 weeks earlier during the annual Harvest Festival, a celebration that brought together nobles and commoners alike in the capital city of Thornhaven. Princess Isabella, Edmund's younger sister and the kingdom's most beloved royal, had done something unprecedented. Instead of delivering the traditional ceremonial speech about gratitude and prosperity, she had stood before thousands of citizens and spoken about the growing inequality in their nation. Isabella's words had been carefully chosen but devastatingly effective. She spoke of families struggling to put food on their tables while the royal treasury funded elaborate ceremonies. She questioned the massive expenditure on the upcoming coronation celebration for Edmund's son, Prince Alexander, when hospitals lacked basic supplies. Her voice had carried across the crowd with the authority of someone who had spent years visiting the poorest regions of Aldoria, seeing firsthand the struggles that palace walls usually concealed. The immediate reaction had been explosive. The crowd had erupted in cheers, their enthusiasm echoing through the streets of Thornhaven for hours. Social media platforms buzzed with clips of Isabella's speech, and within days, it had spread far beyond Valdoria's borders. International news outlets picked up the story, praising the princess for her courage and authenticity. Support for Isabella poured in from unexpected quarters, including prominent activists and even some members of parliament who had long remained silent about royal spending. But within the palace walls, the atmosphere was far from celebratory. Queen Consort Victoria, Edmund's wife of 15 years, had been furious from the moment Isabella stepped down from the podium. Victoria had married into the royal family with clear expectations about maintaining dignity, tradition, and, above all, the image of royal unity. She viewed Isabella's public criticism as nothing short of treason against everything the monarchy represented. Victoria's anger was not merely personal, it was strategic. She had spent years carefully cultivating relationships with wealthy donors, international dignitaries, and media moguls who supported a traditional monarchy. Isabella's speech threatened to unravel these carefully constructed alliances. Already, several major sponsors had withdrawn their support for upcoming royal events, citing concerns about the political direction of the royal family. The tension between Victoria and Isabella was not new, but it had never been so publicly exposed. Victoria represented the old guard of royal protocol, believing that the monarchy's strength lay in maintaining mystique and distance from common concerns. Isabella, conversely, had always believed that modern royalty needed to be relevant and responsive to the people's needs. Their philosophical differences had previously been contained within family discussions, but Isabella's speech had brought their conflict into the open. King Edmund found himself caught between 2 powerful forces within his own family. On one side stood his wife, whose political acumen and connections had strengthened his reign considerably. Victoria had an intuitive understanding of power dynamics and had helped navigate several diplomatic crises during their marriage. Her network of international relationships had proved invaluable in maintaining Valdoria's position on the global stage. On the other side was his sister, whose genuine compassion and connection with the people had made her arguably the most popular member of the royal family. Isabella's charitable work was legendary throughout the kingdom. She had personally funded schools in remote villages, established medical clinics in underserved areas, and had never hesitated to roll up her sleeves and work alongside volunteers during national emergencies. Her authenticity resonated with people in a way that formal royal appearances never could. The immediate aftermath of Isabella's speech had forced Edmund to make several difficult decisions. The palace's communications team worked overtime to manage the media response, but Their efforts felt inadequate against the wave of public support for Isabella's message. Traditional royalist newspapers found themselves in the awkward position of defending royal spending while acknowledging the validity of Isabella's concerns about inequality. Parliament, meanwhile, sensed an opportunity. Several opposition leaders called for increased oversight of royal finances, pointing to Isabella's speech as evidence that even the royal family recognized the need for reform. They proposed legislation that would require detailed public reporting of royal expenditures and limit spending on ceremonial events. The ruling party, traditionally supportive of the monarchy, found itself divided on how to respond. International reaction was equally complex. Some foreign monarchies expressed concern that Isabella's actions might inspire similar criticism within their own borders. Others praised Valdoria for having a royal family member willing to address social issues directly. The president of the neighboring Republic of Astoria publicly commended Isabella's courage, causing a minor diplomatic incident that required careful management. Within the palace staff, reactions were mixed but telling. Long-serving employees who had dedicated their lives to royal service expressed concern about the precedent Isabella's speech might set. They worried about the stability of an institution they had served faithfully for decades. Younger staff members, however, seemed energized by Isabella's willingness to address contemporary issues. Some reported feeling prouder than ever to work for a royal family that included someone willing to speak truth to power. The financial implications of Isabella's speech became apparent within days. Several major corporate sponsors of royal events requested meetings to discuss their ongoing commitments. The luxury tourism industry, which heavily promoted Valdoria's royal heritage, expressed concerns about mixed messages regarding royal values. Wedding planners who specialized in royal-themed events reported cancellations from clients who were unsure about the future direction of royal traditions. Religious leaders throughout Valdoria were similarly divided. The Archbishop of Thornhaven, a traditional ally of the monarchy, privately expressed concern about Isabella's approach while acknowledging the moral weight of her arguments. Younger clergy members were more supportive, seeing Isabella's speech as an example of using privilege responsibly to advocate for the less fortunate. As days passed, the pressure on King Edmund intensified. Victoria demanded that he publicly distance the monarchy from Isabella's views and reaffirm traditional royal values. She argued that allowing Isabella's criticism to stand unchallenged would permanently damage the institution's credibility with its core supporters. Victoria's allies within the nobility echoed these concerns, warning that uncertainty about royal direction could have serious economic and political consequences. Isabella, for her part, remained largely silent in the immediate aftermath of her speech. She continued her scheduled charitable engagements, but declined most interview requests. However, those close to her reported that she had no regrets about speaking out. She believed that remaining silent while people suffered would have been a greater betrayal of her royal duty than any breach of protocol. The kingdom's citizens watched these developments with intense interest. Public opinion polls showed overwhelming support for Isabella's message, with nearly 70% of respondents agreeing that the royal family should address social inequality. However, the same polls revealed significant concern about family division within the monarchy, with many expressing hope that the crisis could be resolved without permanent damage to the institution. As King Edmund prepared for what would become the most consequential decision of his reign, the weight of history pressed upon him. The choice he faced was not merely about managing a family dispute or controlling public relations damage. It was about defining what the Valdorian monarchy would represent for future generations. Would it remain a traditional institution focused on ceremony and continuity, or would it evolve into something more engaged with contemporary social issues? The corridors of Ravencrest Palace, which had witnessed centuries of royal decisions, now held their breath as Edmund contemplated an action that would reshape the monarchy forever. The morning sun continued its journey across the sky, but within the palace walls, everything had changed. The comfortable certainties that had guided royal life for generations were crumbling, and, in their place, New possibilities were emerging that would challenge every assumption about duty, tradition, and the role of royalty in modern society. The Grand Council chamber of Ravencrest Palace had not seen such tension in decades. As King Edmund called for an emergency session with his closest advisors, the very air seemed charged with anticipation. The ornate room, with its towering windows overlooking the royal gardens, had witnessed countless moments of historical significance, but none quite like this. Queen Consort Victoria entered the chamber with her characteristic poise, but those who knew her well could detect the steel beneath her composed exterior. She had spent the morning in heated discussions with her private secretary, crafting a strategy that would force Edmund to choose definitively between supporting his wife's vision of traditional monarchy or enabling what she viewed as Isabella's dangerous populism. Victoria's approach was methodical and politically sophisticated. She had prepared a comprehensive presentation detailing the potential consequences of allowing Isabella's criticism to stand without official response. Her research team had compiled data showing declining support for monarchy in other nations where royal family members had publicly criticized their own institutions. She pointed to recent examples from neighboring kingdoms where internal royal conflicts had led to reduced public funding and diminished international standing. The Queen Consort's argument was compelling in its logic. She maintained that monarchy's power came from its perceived unity and its position above partisan politics. By allowing Isabella to publicly criticize royal spending and priorities, Edmund was essentially endorsing the idea that royal family members could use their platforms to advance personal political agendas. This precedent, Victoria argued, would inevitably lead to further fractures and ultimately weaken the institution beyond repair. Moreover, Victoria had documentation showing the immediate financial impact of Isabella's speech. Corporate sponsorships for upcoming royal events had dropped by nearly 40%. International tour bookings to royal sites had declined sharply. Several major charitable organizations that had traditionally partnered with the royal family were reconsidering their associations, uncertain about the monarchy's future direction. Victoria's presentation also included private correspondence from other European monarchies expressing concern about Valdoria's internal discord. The king of neighboring Astoria had personally written to express worry that Isabella's actions might inspire similar criticism within his own family. The implications extended beyond Valdoria's borders, potentially affecting the stability of monarchical institutions throughout the region. But perhaps Victoria's most powerful argument was personal. She reminded Edmund of their shared vision when they married, of building a strong, stable monarchy that would provide continuity for future generations. She spoke of their son, Prince Alexander, whose future reign could be jeopardized by the uncertainty surrounding royal authority. Victoria painted a picture of a weakened monarchy unable to provide the stability and continuity that had been its greatest strength for centuries. As Victoria concluded her presentation, the weight of her arguments was undeniable. Her vision was not merely about preserving tradition. It was about protecting an institution that had provided stability and identity for millions of people. She was asking Edmund to consider not just immediate public reaction, but the long-term consequences for the monarchy as an institution. However, Edmund was also receiving input from very different sources. His personal secretary had been quietly compiling reports from throughout the kingdom, documenting public reaction to Isabella's speech. The response was overwhelmingly positive, but, more importantly, it revealed a depth of engagement with royal affairs that had been absent for years. Citizens who had previously viewed the royal family as irrelevant to their daily lives were suddenly paying attention. Young people, in particular, were expressing newfound interest in monarchy, not because of its traditions, but because of Isabella's willingness to address real problems. University students organized discussion groups about the role of inherited privilege in addressing social inequality. Online forums buzzed with debates about how traditional institutions could adapt to contemporary challenges. Religious leaders outside the traditional royal circle were also speaking out in support of Isabella's message. Progressive clergy members praised her for using her platform to advocate for the poor and marginalized. They drew parallels between Isabella's actions and historical examples of religious leaders who had challenged authority to defend the vulnerable. International reaction was similarly nuanced. While some monarchies expressed concern, several prominent political leaders praised Isabella's courage. The president of the Federation of Democratic States publicly commended her willingness to address inequality, noting that authentic leadership required the courage to challenge even one's own institutions when they fell short of their ideals. Within the palace staff, a generational divide was becoming apparent. Senior staff members, many of whom had served the royal family for decades, generally supported Victoria's position. They had dedicated their careers to maintaining royal dignity and were genuinely concerned about the precedent Isabella's speech might set. They worried about their own futures in an institution that seemed to be questioning its fundamental principles. Younger staff members, however, were energized by Isabella's willingness to engage with contemporary issues. They reported feeling more motivated than ever to serve an institution that was willing to evolve and address real problems. Several junior staff members had privately expressed to their supervisors that Isabella's speech had made them proud to work for the royal family for the first time in their careers. The media landscape was equally complex. Traditional royalist publications found themselves in an impossible position. They had spent decades defending royal privilege and spending, but Isabella's popularity made direct criticism of her position politically dangerous. Some attempted to thread the needle by praising her compassion while questioning her methods. Others simply avoided the topic altogether, hoping the controversy would fade. Progressive media outlets, conversely, seized on Isabella's speech as validation of their long-standing criticism of royal excess. They amplified her message and used it to call for broader reforms of monarchical institutions. International media coverage was generally positive, portraying Isabella as a modernizing force within an ancient institution. As the days passed, it became clear that Edmund faced a decision with no easy answers. Supporting Victoria's position would maintain traditional royal unity, but risk alienating a public that had overwhelmingly embraced Isabella's message. Supporting Isabella would preserve her popularity, but potentially fracture the royal family and alienate traditional supporters who formed the monarchy's institutional base. The pressure was intensifying from multiple directions. Parliament was scheduled to debate proposed legislation requiring greater transparency in royal finances. The bill had been introduced by opposition members, but growing public support for Isabella's message was making it difficult for governing party members to oppose it outright. Edmund realized that parliamentary action might force his hand regardless of his family preferences. Meanwhile, Isabella herself remained largely out of public view, but her presence was felt throughout the kingdom. Charitable organizations reported unprecedented volunteer applications from people inspired by her speech. Donation drives for poverty relief programs saw massive increases in participation. Her words had clearly resonated beyond mere political rhetoric. They had inspired actual action. Behind palace walls, family dynamics were becoming increasingly strained. Prince Alexander, Edmund's son and heir to the throne, found himself caught between his stepmother's political calculations and his aunt's moral authority. At 28, Alexander had his own vision for modern monarchy, but the current crisis was forcing him to consider these questions much sooner than expected. Alexander's position was particularly delicate because his future reign would be shaped by whatever precedent emerged from the current crisis. If Edmund sided with Victoria, Alexander would inherit a monarchy committed to traditional approaches, but potentially alienated from younger generations. If Edmund supported Isabella, Alexander would inherit an institution empowered to engage with social issues, but facing uncertainty about its role and boundaries. The international implications were also becoming clearer. Valdoria's traditional allies were watching developments closely, but their reactions revealed interesting divisions. Established monarchies were generally concerned about the precedent, while Democratic allies seemed impressed by the royal family's willingness to engage in self-reflection. Economic considerations added another layer of complexity. Tourism to Valdoria had always relied heavily on royal attractions, but initial data suggested that Isabella's speech might actually be increasing international interest in visiting the kingdom. Young travelers, in particular, seemed intrigued by the idea of visiting a country whose royal family was willing to address contemporary issues directly. Corporate sponsors presented a mixed picture. While traditional luxury brands had reduced their royal associations, companies focused on social responsibility were expressing increased interest in partnerships. Several international corporations had reached out about potential collaborations that would align with Isabella's message while supporting royal initiatives. As Edmund prepared for his final deliberations, he was acutely aware that his decision would define not just his own reign, but the future trajectory of Valdorian monarchy. The choice was not simply between supporting his wife or his sister. It was between two fundamentally different visions of what royalty could and should represent in the modern world. The weight of centuries pressed upon his shoulders as Edmund contemplated a decision that would either preserve the monarchy he had inherited or transform it into something entirely new. The comfortable certainties of traditional royal life were giving way to uncharted territory, and the king who had once ruled with confidence now faced the most consequential choice of his lifetime. The private royal study where King Edmund made his most difficult decisions had never felt more confining. As rain pelted against the ancient windows, the king sat surrounded by centuries of royal history, knowing that his next action would determine whether that history continued or transformed into something entirely different. The decision he had been avoiding could no longer be postponed. The catalyst for immediate action came from an unexpected source. Prince Alexander, heir to the throne, had requested a private audience with his father. At 28, Alexander represented the future of the monarchy, and his perspective carried weight that even surpassed the immediate political calculations swirling around the palace. Alexander's position surprised everyone, including his father. Rather than supporting either Victoria's traditional approach or Isabella's reformist stance, the prince had developed his own comprehensive vision for resolving the crisis. His proposal was audacious, thoughtful, and potentially revolutionary. The prince had spent weeks quietly consulting with constitutional scholars, political advisors, and public opinion experts. His research had revealed something that palace insiders had missed. The public was not simply supporting Isabella's criticism of royal spending. They were responding to something much deeper, a desire for authentic leadership that acknowledged contemporary challenges while maintaining institutional stability. Alexander's proposal was elegant in its complexity. Rather than choosing between traditional monarchy and reformist criticism, he suggested that the royal family publicly embrace a new model of accountable monarchy. This approach would maintain royal dignity and tradition while establishing formal mechanisms for addressing the social concerns Isabella had raised. The centerpiece of Alexander's plan was the creation of a Royal Social Impact Council, chaired by Isabella herself, with formal authority to review royal spending and recommend redirections towards social programs. This body would include representatives from various sectors of society and would publish annual reports on royal contributions to national welfare. Additionally, Alexander proposed establishing a new tradition of annual royal accountability addresses, where senior royal family members would publicly discuss their activities, expenditures, and social impact. These addresses would replace some traditional ceremonial events, redirecting resources toward meaningful engagement with contemporary issues. The genius of Alexander's proposal was that it transformed Isabella's criticism from a crisis into an opportunity for institutional evolution. Rather than punishing her for speaking out, it would institutionalize her concerns and give her formal authority to address them. This approach would satisfy public demand for accountability while maintaining royal unity and dignity. However, implementing Alexander's vision would require unanimous family support, and Victoria's reaction was predictably explosive. She viewed the proposal as a complete capitulation to Isabella's position and a fundamental betrayal of monarchical principles. In Victoria's view, subjecting royal decisions to public scrutiny would destroy the mystique and authority that made monarchy effective. Victoria's counterargument was sophisticated and deeply felt. She maintained that monarchy's greatest strength was its ability to provide continuity and stability above the chaos of democratic politics. By submitting royal decisions to public accountability, Alexander's proposal would essentially transform the monarchy into another political institution, subject to the same pressures and conflicts that plagued elected governments. Moreover, Victoria argued that the proposal would set a dangerous precedent for other monarchies. If Valdoria's royal family submitted to public oversight, it would pressure other royal families to do likewise, potentially destabilizing monarchical institutions throughout the region. The implications extended far beyond Valdoria's borders. Victoria's concerns were not merely theoretical. She had received private communications from allied royal families expressing serious concern about Valdoria's internal discord. Several had hinted that continued uncertainty about Valdorian royal direction could affect diplomatic and economic relationships. The stakes were higher than family harmony. They involved international standing and economic partnerships. Isabella's reaction to Alexander's proposal was more complex than anyone expected. While she appreciated the prince's attempt to institutionalize her concerns, she worried about the bureaucratization of royal social engagement. Her most effective work had always been direct and personal, unencumbered by formal structures and reporting requirements. Isabella's strength came from her ability to respond immediately to crises, to show up unannounced at disaster sites, to fund emergency relief without waiting for committee approvals. She feared that formalizing her role might actually reduce her effectiveness by subjecting her compassionate responses to administrative processes. Moreover, Isabella was concerned about being used as a figurehead for institutional reform without having real power to create meaningful change. She had seen too many charitable organizations where passionate advocates were neutralized by bureaucratic structures that prioritized process over results. As Edmund weighed these competing visions, external pressures continued to mount. Parliament's debate over royal financial transparency had attracted international attention, with media outlets portraying it as a test case for monarchical accountability in the modern era. The proposed legislation was gaining support not just from opposition parties, but from governing party members who were responding to constituent pressure. Public opinion polling revealed interesting nuances in citizen attitudes. While Isabella remained overwhelmingly popular, there was also strong support for maintaining royal dignity and tradition. Citizens wanted accountability and social engagement, but they also valued the stability and continuity that monarchy represented. Alexander's proposal seemed to thread this needle perfectly, which explained its growing appeal among political observers. International reaction to Alexander's proposal was cautiously positive. Democratic allies praised the innovative approach to monarchical accountability, while monarchist allies appreciated the attempt to preserve institutional dignity while addressing contemporary concerns. Several constitutional scholars published analyses suggesting that Valdoria's approach could become a model for modernizing monarchy without destroying its essential character. The economic implications of different approaches were becoming clearer as well. Financial analysts suggested that Alexander's accountable monarchy model could actually strengthen Valdoria's international economic position by demonstrating institutional adaptability and social responsibility. Several major international corporations had expressed interest in partnership opportunities that would align with the proposed Royal Social Impact Council. Meanwhile, the tourism industry was providing unexpected insights into public attitudes. International visitors were increasingly interested in experiencing a modernizing monarchy rather than simply viewing historical artifacts. Tour operators reported growing demand for programs that would showcase royal social engagement alongside traditional ceremonial attractions. Within the palace, staff reactions to Alexander's proposal revealed generational and philosophical divides that had previously remained hidden. Senior staff members generally opposed formal accountability mechanisms, viewing them as threats to institutional independence. However, many acknowledged that some form of change was now inevitable, and Alexander's approach was preferable to external impositions. Younger staff members were enthusiastic about the proposal, seeing it as an opportunity to work for an institution that was actively engaged with contemporary challenges. Several reported that the prospect of contributing to meaningful social impact had reinvigorated their commitment to royal service. The religious community's response was similarly mixed but trending positive. Progressive clergy members praised the proposal as an example of how traditional institutions could maintain their essential character while adapting to contemporary moral demands. Conservative religious leaders remained concerned about subjecting divine authority to human accountability, but even they acknowledged the proposal's attempt to preserve institutional dignity. As the crisis entered its fourth week, Edmund realized that postponing decision would itself become a decision. The royal family's silence was being interpreted as indecision, which was damaging institutional credibility regardless of what ultimate choice he made. The time for deliberation was ending. Action was required. The king's contemplation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the prime minister. Parliament's debate over royal transparency had accelerated, and a vote was scheduled for the following week. If the legislation passed, it would impose external accountability mechanisms far more restrictive than anything Alexander had proposed. The window for family-directed reform was closing rapidly. Edmund faced a stark reality. He could either lead institutional change or have it imposed from outside. Alexander's proposal suddenly appeared not as a radical departure from tradition, but as the most conservative option available. By embracing voluntary accountability, the royal family could maintain control over institutional evolution while satisfying public demands for reform. The weight of decision pressed upon Edmund as he prepared for what would become the most consequential announcement in modern Valdorian royal history. The comfortable world of traditional monarchy was ending, but perhaps something stronger and more relevant could emerge from its transformation. The future of the institution he had sworn to protect hung in the balance, awaiting a choice that would define monarchy for generations to come. The throne room of Ravencrest Palace had witnessed countless historic moments, but none quite as transformative as the announcement King Edmund was about to make. As representatives from across the kingdom gathered in the ornate chamber, the weight of centuries seemed to hover in the air. The decision that had consumed weeks of deliberation was finally ready to be revealed. King Edmund's announcement, delivered with the gravity befitting its significance, shocked even those who thought they understood the depths of the royal crisis. Rather than simply choosing between Victoria's traditional approach and Isabella's reformist stance, the king had crafted a comprehensive transformation that would fundamentally restructure how the Valdorian monarchy operated. The centerpiece of Edmund's historic action was the establishment of the Crown Accountability Framework, a revolutionary system that would make the royal family directly answerable to the citizens they served. This framework went far beyond anything Alexander had initially proposed, incorporating elements that satisfied both traditionalists and reformers while creating something entirely unprecedented in monarchical history. Under the new framework, Princess Isabella would indeed chair the Royal Social Impact Council, but with far greater authority than originally envisioned. The council would have the power not just to review royal spending, but to redirect royal resources towards social programs, emergency relief, and infrastructure development. This authority would be exercised in consultation with democratically elected representatives and civil society organizations. However, Edmund's announcement included provisions that addressed Victoria's concerns about maintaining royal dignity and institutional stability. The framework explicitly preserved ceremonial functions and cultural traditions while ensuring that these activities contributed meaningfully to national identity and social cohesion. Royal ceremonies would be reimagined as opportunities for national unity and celebration of shared values rather than displays of inherited privilege. The financial restructuring was perhaps the most radical aspect of Edmund's plan. The royal family would voluntarily reduce their official allowances by 60%, with the redirected funds supporting education, health care, and poverty reduction programs. Additionally, royal properties would be opened for expanded public use, generating revenue for social programs while maintaining their historical and cultural significance. Victoria's reaction to the announcement was as complex as it was emotional. Her initial fury at what she perceived as capitulation gradually gave way to recognition of the political sophistication underlying Edmund's approach. By proactively embracing accountability, the royal family had seized control of institutional reform rather than having it imposed by external forces. The Queen Consort's pragmatic nature ultimately led her to recognize that Edmund's framework might actually strengthen monarchical legitimacy in the long term. By voluntarily submitting to public accountability, the royal family demonstrated confidence in their value to society and commitment to serving the public good. This approach could transform monarchy from an anachronistic institution into a dynamic force for social progress. Victoria's network of international contacts proved invaluable in managing the global reaction to Valdoria's monarchical transformation. Other royal families initially expressed concern about the precedent, but Victoria's diplomatic efforts helped frame the changes as uniquely Valdorian responses to specific national circumstances rather than universal models for monarchical reform. Isabella's response to the announcement was one of cautious optimism mixed with determination to ensure the framework achieved its intended goals. She understood that the success of the new system would depend on rigorous implementation and genuine commitment to social impact rather than mere public relations gestures. The princess immediately began working with constitutional experts and social policy specialists to develop operational procedures for the Royal Social Impact Council. Her approach was characteristically hands-on, involving extensive consultation with community organizations, academic institutions, and international development agencies to ensure the council's effectiveness. Isabella's first initiative under the new framework was a comprehensive review of royal property usage, identifying opportunities to expand public access while generating revenue for social programs. Her proposals included converting unused palace wings into educational facilities, opening royal gardens for community events, and establishing royal estates as sites for environmental research and conservation programs. Prince Alexander's role in the new framework positioned him as a bridge between traditional and reformed monarchy. As heir apparent, he would oversee the integration of ceremonial functions with social impact initiatives, ensuring that royal traditions evolved meaningfully rather than simply being abandoned or preserved unchanged. Alexander's innovative approach involved reimagining royal ceremonies as opportunities for national reflection and commitment to share values. Traditional events would incorporate elements celebrating social progress, cultural diversity, and collective achievement. This approach would maintain the pageantry and symbolism that made monarchy compelling while ensuring these elements serve contemporary purposes. The immediate public reaction to Edmund's announcement was overwhelmingly positive, but with interesting variations across different demographic groups. Young citizens were particularly enthusiastic about the framework's potential for meaningful change, while older citizens appreciated the preservation of traditional elements within a reform structure. International media coverage was extensive and generally favorable, with many outlets praising Valdoria's innovative approach to modernizing monarchical institutions. Several constitutional scholars suggested that the Crown Accountability Framework could serve as a model for other nations seeking to balance traditional governance structures with contemporary democratic values. The economic implications of the royal transformation were quickly apparent and largely positive. International investors expressed increased confidence in Valdorian stability, viewing the proactive institutional reform as evidence of adaptive governance capacity. Several major corporations announced plans to increase investment in Valdorian social programs, aligning their corporate social responsibility initiatives with the royal family's new direction. Tourism industry projections suggested significant increases in international visitors interested in experiencing the world's first accountable monarchy. Tour operators began developing programs that would showcase both traditional royal heritage and contemporary social impact initiatives, creating new economic opportunities throughout the kingdom. Parliament's reaction to the royal announcement was complex but ultimately supportive. The proposed legislation requiring royal financial transparency was quickly withdrawn, as Edmund's voluntary framework exceeded what external oversight would have achieved. Opposition parties praised the royal family's proactive approach while maintaining their commitment to continued monitoring of implementation. Within the royal household, staff reactions revealed the depth of institutional transformation that would be required. Senior staff members who had initially resisted change found themselves energized by the challenge of implementing unprecedented reforms. Many reported feeling renewed purpose in their service to an institution actively working to improve society. Younger staff members were particularly enthusiastic about opportunities to contribute to meaningful social impact alongside traditional royal duties. Several reported that the new framework had transformed their perception of royal service from ceremonial obligation to purposeful public service. The religious community's response was overwhelmingly positive, with leaders from various faiths praising the royal family's commitment to using privilege responsibly. The Archbishop of Thornhaven delivered a special sermon celebrating the alignment between royal action and moral teaching about responsibility to the less fortunate. International diplomatic reactions were carefully managed through Victoria's extensive network, but generally reflected appreciation for Valdoria's innovative approach to governmental evolution. Democratic allies praised the kingdom's commitment to accountability and social responsibility, while monarchical allies appreciated the preservation of institutional dignity within a reform structure. As the dust settled from Edmund's historic announcement, the real work of implementation began. The Crown Accountability Framework would require extensive development of new procedures, training programs, and oversight mechanisms. Isabella threw herself into this work with characteristic energy, determined to ensure that the framework achieved substantive rather than merely symbolic change. The Royal Social Impact Council's first major initiative involved a comprehensive assessment of national needs and royal capacity to address them. This assessment would guide resource allocation decisions and establish metrics for measuring the monarchy's social impact. Isabella insisted on rigorous evaluation procedures that would ensure accountability for outcomes rather than just activities. Victoria, meanwhile, worked to maintain international relationships while explaining Valdoria's institutional evolution to allied nations. Her diplomatic skills proved crucial in preventing the royal transformation from creating international complications or encouraging unwanted reforms in other monarchies. Prince Alexander began developing new ceremonial traditions that would celebrate social progress alongside historical continuity. His vision involved creating royal events that would inspire national commitment to shared values while maintaining the dignity and pageantry that made monarchy culturally significant. King Edmund himself assumed the role of guardian of the new framework's integrity, ensuring that reforms achieve their intended purposes while preserving essential monarchical functions. His leadership would be crucial in navigating the inevitable challenges that would arise during the transition period. As Valdoria embarked on its unprecedented experiment in accountable monarchy, the eyes of the world watched with intense interest. The success or failure of the Crown Accountability Framework would have implications far beyond Valdorian borders, potentially influencing how traditional institutions could adapt to contemporary challenges while maintaining their essential character. The transformation that began with Isabella's courageous speech had evolved into something far more comprehensive and revolutionary than anyone had initially imagined. The comfortable certainties of traditional monarchy had given way to the exciting uncertainties of institutional innovation, creating possibilities for a form of governance that honored both heritage and contemporary values. The future would test whether Edmund's historic action had preserved the monarchy by transforming it, or whether the changes had been too radical for the institution to survive. But as the royal family began implementing their new framework, there was a sense of renewed purpose and relevance that had been absent for decades. The monarchy that emerged from this crisis would be fundamentally different from its predecessor, shaped by the bold vision of a king willing to risk everything to ensure his institution's survival and meaning in the modern world.